So as I'm recording this video, the attorney, Eric Nelson, the defense lawyer for Derrick Chauvin, the officer who's accused of killing George Floyd in early 2020, sparking race-related protests and riots across the entire country. Remember that little thing? He is currently giving his closing arguments in his defense of Derrick Chauvin. And with that, we are going to be left waiting some amount of time, minutes, hours, days, potentially over a week, before the jury returns a verdict of guilty or innocence on the 3 counts for Derrick Chauvin. The 3 charges are murder in the 2nd degree, murder in the 3rd degree, and manslaughter in the 2nd degree. While we wait for that, I wanted to do this video to kind of compile my own thoughts and allow some other people to maybe have a different perspective than what they're seeing out there. This video is intended to be relatively neutral, and I know that might make some people angry, but I think this conversation around Derrick Chauvin's guilt or innocence has become politicized, something I think is relatively improper in regards to criminal law and the application of actual justice. Actual justice should be devoid of politics, and yet we have quickly segregated politically over this case and how we approach it, how we discuss it. And I think there's a lot of risk in that. So with that said, let's talk about this in my sort of neutral way to kind of give people my thoughts and hopefully help them develop their thoughts as we wait for a jury verdict in this case of guilt or innocence, which will determine not only a man's life, but will also determine the fate of the country over the next several weeks or months. All right, let's get into it. I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a legal and political commentator here on YouTube. If you like that stuff, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any episodes, okay? So this is a hot button topic. Did Derrick Chauvin murder George Floyd, or did he negligently manslaughter George Floyd, or did he not? That's the question the jury needs to answer, and that is a question we're all waiting to see the answer for. And I know many, if not most, if not even all of you, have already made up your minds on the guilt or innocence of Derrick Chauvin. With that said, I wanted to, again, do this video to round out some thoughts about this process in general. Now, I'm going to make generalized statements here, and they do not apply to Chauvin or Floyd. So don't get mad. First of all, don't get mad when something challenges how you're looking at something or whatever. You don't have to get mad about it. Just take it in and feel free to disagree about them. If I'm talking specifically about this case, I'm going to try and make that very clear. Let's start with the first don't get mad. This is a question about whether or not a murder occurred in the death of someone, or whether or not an overdose occurred. And when we're talking about questions of murder, of police-involved killings, of all of these things, we need to probably remove politics from it. And the reason it shouldn't be political is because murder isn't political unless it is, and this one is definitely not. What is political is the discussion about it, and that tends to take people down a path of saying you need to have a specific opinion about this case to be pure in your political beliefs, and that is not true. There are people on the right who can think that Derrick Chauvin murdered George Floyd. That's okay. And if it's not okay, then your argument is already flawed and should fail. There are people on the left who can think that George Floyd overdosed and that Derrick Chauvin didn't contribute to his death. That is okay as well. You can even be fully opposed to police violence and still recognize that Derrick Chauvin may not have been the cause of death for George Floyd. And you can even be fully in support of police violence or police use of force to some reasonable level, even if it's above what the common sort of idea is, and still determine that George Floyd was killed by Derrick Chauvin in some specific way, making him culpable for murder or negligence. And those are okay positions to have. And the moment they became not okay was a point in which this discussion went away from legality and into the realm of politics. But that's not where discussions about guilt or innocence, especially in regards to murder, belong. We've developed a system in this country where we bring in attorneys on both sides. We allow full representation, the fullest representation you can afford, you can beg for, whatever it is, to come in and give you the best possible defense. And in the same way, we allow the state a lot of leverage in making the best possible offense they can make against you when they deem it's necessary. Now, there are some questions about that, but I haven't seen anything in regards to the state that is over the top improper. Sure, there have been some questions here and there about the state's actions, and those questions have gone before the judge and typically have been resolved mostly in the state's favor, although not entirely. Questions about the timing of reports being sent in, questions about testimony of medical experts and what they said, and those have gone before the judge to determine if they are overly prejudicial against Derrick Chauvin, and he has determined them not to be. Now, we do get to ask those questions on appeal, and if he is convicted, I'm sure those questions will be raised. But at the moment, these questions and these statements about the unfairness of the trial specifically. Now, I'm not talking about generally. I'm talking about specific allegations of unfairness at individual points, I think personally are a little bit overblown. Derrick Chauvin has had extremely competent representation by Eric Nelson. He's had a large piggy bank of money to draw from. They have been able to hire experts. They technically could have brought on other attorneys if they thought it was necessary to handle the work. There's no shortage of resources going into Chauvin's defense here, and the questions that have come before the court have largely been things that are probably not overly prejudicial. Now, you may have seen some of them overblown, in my opinion, on various media outlets, and that is the problem with the politicization of this case. Derrick Chauvin's innocence is not a left versus right issue. It really, really isn't, as much as a lot of people have tried to make it out to be. He may be innocent, he may be guilty, and the outcome of that is okay. Either way, it doesn't mean there was some large-scale impropriety here. This goes all the way back to jury selection. I know many people have been talking about this the entire time, about whether or not the jury is biased or improper, but you have to understand, I guess you don't have to, you should understand that there was a very long process with tons of jury candidates and ample opportunity for each side to challenge, question, and rigorously interview each of these jurors that have been selected. They chose those jurors. Now, saying that the jury is going to be impartial or is not able to be impartial under these circumstances is going to be very tough. There's not a lot that has changed since the time of jury selection to make them somehow incapable of being impartial. One of the things that did happen, though, was the city's settlement of the case with George Floyd's family, a publicly announced settlement for $27 million. And if anything influenced a juror's decision, that would be one of the major ones. A couple jurors actually admitted to that and were excused and replaced. Now, this is prior to any of the actual trial process occurring. So they were excused and replaced prior to hearing any of the testimony and arguments going forward. But that is one thing that I do think potentially hangs as a sword of taint over this case. And we'll see how that is. It was completely, let's be real, it was completely improper for the city to settle and to announce that settlement prior to the trial of Chauvin. But there's nothing illegal about it. It's improper in terms of it can influence a jury, it can influence people's thinkings about it, and that should have waited. What the city was scared of course, was Derrick Chauvin being found guilty. If he's found guilty, then they may be on the hook ostensibly for a higher award if it goes to court. I don't think that's an actual reasonable fear, but that is the fear that they would have. So with that said, let's move into the testimony and where things have kind of gone and how reporting may have been skewed on this. And this is, I think, the biggest point of contention, and it's going to be the hardest part for the jury to work out. The early witnesses for the prosecution were not great. We had the EMT lady with the Karen haircut. We had the MMA expert who attended all sorts of riots. We've had a bunch of people come out and give their testimony, and the defense was very, very good at picking apart that testimony and creating all sorts of doubt about what they were actually saying, impeaching their credibility, not necessarily going after the truthfulness, just impeaching what they're saying and raising doubt in the minds of the jury. I think the defense did a very good job of that. Where things started to shift in this trial, and this is something that I have in watching, where let's be clear on this. My information bubble is typically coming from right-wing sources. I don't like that that's where it is, because I like to get all sorts of opinions. It helps me develop the show in a specific way, even if I disagree with those opinions. But that's how Twitter and my news feed and stuff starts to feed things to me. It comes from right-wing sources primarily. And in watching those sources, I have seen people reporting on the medical expert testimony as if the defense were knocking it out of the park. And I think that is a big misstep for people. And I think that it has been overblown, the level of sort of favor that Derrick Chauvin was able to raise during that portion of the case. The medical experts sat in front of a jury, and 5 different medical experts sat in front of that jury, credibly attributing the death to Derrick Chauvin. Now, you may disagree. Again, when I'm talking about credibility here, I'm not talking about specifics for you or for even the individual medical examiners. I'm sure many people on the internet have theories about how they're all wrong. What you have to take into account is that the jury is not sitting on the internet reading about obscure theories as to why these people are incorrect. What they're getting is a medical professional, a list of their credentials, and very reasonable and reasoned testimony as to why Derrick Chauvin is the cause of death of George Floyd. And that's a hard thing to reconcile when we're discussing things on the internet, because out here, we're not bound by what we hear in the courtroom. We have Google at our fingertips. We can get contrary opinions, and we can go ahead and take those opinions and apply them as we will. And we may determine that he's guilty. We may determine that he's innocent. In the jury room, they don't. They were bombarded with 5 different experts coming to very, very similar conclusions about the cause of death of George Floyd. Now, when the defense brought out their experts, they did bring out a use of force expert who said that the use of force was reasonable, and I think that that was something that they absolutely needed to do. However, their medical expert's testimony was not the strongest, and bringing out things like carbon monoxide levels caused by car exhaust nearby, while that can raise doubt, I don't know that it rises to the level of reasonable doubt, and I think the credibility of the defense's witness may actually have been harmed by making those sorts of arguments and assertions. We'll have to see what the jury says, of course, but it's very easy to say, oh, well, George Floyd's or Derrick Chauvin's medical expert came out and said he could have died from this, this, and this. Therefore, now the jury has doubt. That's not how it works. That's not how it would work for you. It's not how it works in practice either. Remember, it's not any doubt. It's reasonable doubt. And that's the point that I really want to start hammering on as I get to the end of this video. This video is not about whether, this trial is not about whether Derrick Chauvin's attorney was able to raise doubt. There's tons of doubt. There's always doubt. Any number, any amount of fentanyl or meth in someone's system raises doubt as to their cause of death. The presence of COVID raises doubt as to their cause of death. Hell, no cause of death is absolute. You could have plenty of possible contributing factors that can go all the way back to someone's birth and decisions that they've made from then to now. There's any number of things that could play into that. The question is whether the doubt is reasonable to the jury. That is the hard part of this, because a reasonable level of doubt is very different from any level of doubt. And I've seen a lot of people focusing on any levels of doubt rather than reasonable levels of doubt. And when you have as many experts as they did, not just by volume of expert, by the way, but credibly testifying to these results, you have a real problem with that reasonable doubt standard in the eyes of a jury. Again, I'm not telling you how to think. I'm not even telling you what I think, by the way. I'm just clearly pointing out that this is not an open and shut slam dunk case, and it's not going to be, well, it's not automatically decided by the jury's politics. And if you're thinking that way, no matter what the outcome is going to be, it's going to be considered unjust. And that's a reality in general, is that this will be considered unjust by a significant portion of the population, no matter how it comes out. But that shouldn't inform your thoughts on it or the jury's in any case, because the other people's opinions about this should not actually weigh into whether or not he's guilty or innocent. Again, that's that mob mentality that the system is designed to correct. So, finally, in this case, we have one thing that has been left out of almost all media reporting, and that is the presumption of innocence for Derrick Chauvin. Lots of people have presumed all sorts of innocence for George Floyd, and that's really easy to do in questions of police violence. Okay, when you've got a police officer involved in the killing of someone else, the question is, what did that other person do? And the media is quick to point out the presumption of innocence for George Floyd. He did not get to go to trial. He did not get to levy a defense. He died in the street. What the media has not been very good at doing is talking about that presumption of innocence for Derrick Chauvin. He's entitled to those same presumptions and protections, and without them, our system is gone. So however you're approaching this case, you must come with the idea that Derrick Chauvin is first innocent and that the state bears its burden to overcome that presumption. And then you have to ask the question of whether or not they did. As for my personal thoughts on this case, in closing, I'm very, very torn on it. I believe that the state has presented enough of a case for a reasonable jury to conclude that Derrick Chauvin is the cause of death of George Floyd, either through his intentional acts or through his negligence. I genuinely see that they could come to that conclusion. I similarly genuinely think that the defense raised enough doubt for some amount of jurors to say there is enough doubt here that I find it reasonable to think that there's an alternate cause of death for George Floyd. I do think that, and therefore that Derrick Chauvin is not guilty. With that said, I think how the jury may come out on this, and this is the opinion I've had for a while, and my thoughts on this are not based specifically on the facts of the case or even the facts as presented. It's based on a whole lot of factors about how I feel about juries, how they approach courtrooms, how they approach police officers who are accused specifically, and the challenge in prosecuting a police officer generally. Okay? I think this court may very well find him not guilty on the 2 murder counts. And if they do that, I think it's entirely possible. In fact, I think this might be the outcome, that they find him guilty of culpable negligence, leading to a manslaughter in the 2nd-degree conviction. Now, why I think that is because I think that anybody looking at the situation of Derrick Chauvin may say that he acted inappropriately, may say that he acted indifferently. In fact, that was part of the prosecution's closing arguments, is that he was acting indifferently towards the health of George Floyd. That falls under 2nd-degree manslaughter. That does not fall under murder. Murder is intentionality, and I'm not sure that he actually got to that level of intent. I'm not convinced that Derrick Chauvin's actions at the onset of the situation were assaultive, were excessive force. Now, I do think at some point during the encounter, there is a question of where the initial amount of force used transitions into being something that the officer is responsible for. But I don't think Chauvin did that at the beginning, and that's why I think a conviction of murder may not occur here, and why they may get to manslaughter. At that point, at some point, when George Floyd goes unresponsive and no longer has a pulse, and the officers are aware of this fact, we have to ask the question, at what point then are they negligent in their handling of this individual? And I think that's where the jury may get hung up. That's not my personal opinion on the case. I don't necessarily have a personal opinion on what the outcome should be. It's a close call either way, but I think that's where we may end up. And with that said, I'd love to know where you guys think this may end up as well. Please feel free to drop your comments down in the description below. I know this is a longer video and it's just pure discussion, but sometimes I think the discussion of the law and the facts and the reasoning behind it is important and necessary, and this is one of those times. So if you like this style video, though, also let me know that down in the comments below, and I can do more of them. It just seemed prudent at this point in time. So until then, thank you for watching and giving me your considered and honest attention and opinion. I look forward to next time. Peace. Peace.